Welcome to The Explainer. All right, let's dive right into one of history's absolute most fascinating and destructive mysteries. We're traveling way back to 330 BC, deep into the mountains of southern Iran, straight to the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, Persepolis. What happened here, it wasn't just some run-of-the-mill structural fire. No, this was an event that literally shifted the course of the ancient world.
So, we're dropping right into the scene of a 2,000-year-old crime. We know for a fact that a magnificent, sprawling, ancient palace complex went up in massive flames. But the true motive? Well, that's still hidden in the ashes. Was this catastrophic destruction the result of a totally chaotic, drunken accident? Or was it a cold, calculated act of imperial intent?
To really wrap our heads around this ancient cold case, let's trace Alexander of Macedon's steps. Imagine this. After an exhausting 5-month campaign just carving his way through Persia's heartland, Alexander finally enters the city. He and his massive army hunker down there for nearly 4 months. They're distributing plunder, setting up the new administration, getting comfortable. And then, out of nowhere, on one single night, right near the end of his stay, a sudden fire breaks out.
Now, when Alexander arrived on day 1, he didn't just walk into some empty building. Far from it. His army seized the royal storerooms, capturing what was essentially one of the largest hoards of gold and silver in the entire ancient world. I mean, this was the ultimate prize, the grand treasury of the Persian kings.
Think about this. 2. That's how many centuries it took Darius I and his successors to build this massive, intricate, fully intact complex. 2 whole centuries. Generation after generation of master builders and artisans literally poured their lives into this site. It wasn't just a place to sleep, it was the ceremonial center of gravity for a vast, vast empire.
So the really crucial detail here is exactly where Alexander decided to drop his bags. Of all places, he installs himself right in the audience hall of Xerxes. And if you know your ancient history, that name should be ringing a massive bell right now. Xerxes was the exact same Persian king whose armies had invaded Greece and burned Athens to the ground a century and a half earlier. So Alexander is sitting right there, practically in the ghost of Athens' past. You're going to want to keep that ironclad historical grudge in the back of your mind.
Which brings us to the night of the fire, and our very first piece of witness testimony. The ancient historian Plutarch paints a picture of just absolute chaos. Imagine a wild, completely out-of-control drunken banquet. Wine is flowing, the celebrations are entirely off the rails, and suddenly, an Athenian courtesan named Thais stands up. She proposes burning the palace right then and there, as direct revenge for Xerxes destroying the Greek temples. And Plutarch, he claims that Alexander, cup of wine in hand, gets completely swept up in the frenzy, throwing the very first torch himself, while his officers and cheering guests just follow suit.
But hold on, because the historian Arrian draws on much more sober military sources, and he tells a completely different story. Arrian describes a calculated decision, a sober, deeply deliberate move by Alexander to destroy the ceremonial heart of Persian kingship. In this version, it's a massive political statement, a brutal, undeniable signal sent across the world to both Persia and Greece that the old empire was just finished for good.
So the ancient historians disagree pretty sharply here. On one hand, you've got this wild night of drunken vengeance sparked by a deep historical grudge. On the other, a cold, calculated military strategy designed to completely break the psychological spine of an empire. We're looking at 2 completely different motives for the exact same catastrophic event. But, despite these deeply conflicting motives, both ancient accounts agree perfectly on the terrifying physical realities of that night. The fire spread incredibly fast. The grand architecture actually worked against it. Those towering flames were fueled by highly combustible cedar roof beams and accelerated by beautifully painted timber. Literally in mere hours, the inferno consumed intricate reliefs, spectacular throne rooms, and treasuries that had taken 200 years of masterful craftsmanship to create.
And that brings us to the ultimate question of this explainer. Was this just a moment of drunken vengeance spiraling totally out of control, or was it a strategic move to physically erase Persian royal power? Did Alexander want to ensure that every watching satrap, every conquered province, and every Greek city across the sea knew, without a doubt, that the Persian Empire no longer existed in any physical form?
Well, to find the answer, we can't just rely on ancient gossip. Let's look at the modern forensic evidence.
We're going to fast forward thousands of years to the 20th century, when French and American archaeologists finally arrived at the site. They started uncovering the Great Terrace to see what the Earth itself had to say about that night.
And the physical evidence they found is just fascinating. Archaeologists discovered distinct scorch marks and thick layers of ash that are completely consistent with the ancient descriptions. But here is the real kicker. The fire damage was concentrated strictly around the Palace of Xerxes. Other major structures sitting on the exact same terrace, like the Apodona and the Palace of Darius, they show far less fire damage. What that tells us is that this wasn't some out-of-control site-wide inferno that just consumed everything in its path.
Those physical forensics strongly point to a targeted burning. Think about it. If it was a wild, drunken accident, you'd absolutely expect the fire to jump indiscriminately from building to building across the whole complex, right? Because the destruction was so heavily localized to Xerxes' specific quarters, it really lends heavy support to Arrian's calculated strategy theory. However, it's really important to note that historians still remain deeply divided today, mostly because physical evidence alone can't definitively prove what was actually going on inside Alexander's head.
Adding a really dramatic, almost tragic twist to our cold case, some ancient accounts report that Alexander experienced immediate regret. Supposedly, as the sheer gravity of what he had just done washed over him, he desperately ordered his men to extinguish the flames before the damage was complete. But, of course, with all those dry cedar beams and painted timbers, it was simply way too late. The heart of the empire was already gone.
And the aftermath? It's pretty staggering. Soon after the fire, Alexander packed up his army, left Persepolis behind, and continued his relentless pursuit of Darius into the eastern provinces. He never returned to rebuild it. For over 2,000 years, the once spectacular ruins of Persepolis stood completely abandoned, just quietly buried under blowing Persian dust until those 20th century archaeologists finally brought it back into the light.
So modern archaeology perfectly confirms the fire. The scorch marks on the stone columns are literally still there for us to see today, proving the how and the where. But the ashes of human history are excellent at hiding the truth. Will we ever truly know the why? Was it the fiery climax of a wildly out-of-control drunken party? Or was it the absolute coldest of military calculations? It just goes to show, the deepest mysteries of the ancient world remain wonderfully, perhaps permanently, unsolved.